Breaking news just coming in, the Supreme Court has once again slammed the Italian envoy. The court, in fact, has said we will examine what immunity he has. In fact, the court coming down heavily on the Italian envoy over the Marines issue has said the Italian envoy has lost our trust. We did not expect him to behave like this. Remember, it was the Italian ambassador who had given an undertaking to the Supreme Court, assuring the court that the two Marines will return to India, and later, of course, he went back on that assurance. For more on that, let's now go across to my colleague A. Vaidyanathan, who joins us from the Supreme Court. Vaidya, the court once again coming down heavily on the envoy.
The first 2 points. One, the order passed on 14th of March asking the Italian ambassador Mancini not to leave the country is further extended till further orders. It means he can't leave the country as per Supreme Court orders. Secondly, the court said that till we have time till 22nd for the Marines to return, they've adjourned the case to April 2nd. But during the course of the argument, the court was completely criticizing which the Italian ambassador has behaved. The court said he has come to the court not as an ambassador but as an individual. We have lost trust on him, and also said when the Italian Ambassador's Council, Mr. Mukul Rohtgi, argued saying that as per the Vienna Convention he has got immunity, and court immediately said you come to the court as an individual, not as an ambassador. If Mr. Mukul Rohtgi wants to address this court as a lawyer for Mancini, he can argue. For ambassador, he can leave. But Mukul Rohtgi said he is appearing for the ambassador as well as an individual for the petitioner. So he also said that he has got immunity, but the court said we know whatever our powers are. You don't realize our powers, but we will examine what your immunity you have. But once you come to the court as an individual, given an assurance they will be coming back, but you have gone back. So what trust? How can we trust you? We will examine. But as the Chief Justice also observed, saying that he doesn't have immunity since he has come to the court as an individual, not as an ambassador. But all this thing went on. Attorney General Mr. Vahanwadi, appearing for the centre, told the court that the central government, the External Affairs Ministry, received a new note verbale on the 15th of March, which basically says that it wants the Ministry of External Affairs to give an assurance that it can't restrict the freedom of the Italian ambassador as per the Vienna Convention. And Mr. Vahanwadi informing the court, this is basically against the court order. But Chief Justice said still they have time till 22nd. Let us take up the case on the 2nd of April. At the time we will examine what immunity he has. But of course, the courtroom was completely packed, and the Chief Justice was completely lost his cool and was quite upset the way the Italian ambassadors did it to the court.
Right, Vaidya, of course, what the court has said is very, very significant. The court telling the counsel who appeared for the Italian envoy, you don't realize what powers we have, when, of course, there was talk of the envoy's diplomatic immunity. And that is very, very significant, Vaidya, isn't it? Because, there has been speculation about whether the court could eventually hold the envoy in contempt and even consider criminal action against him. Remember, Harish Salve, who was earlier representing the Italian government and later quit in protest, has even said that if the court decides it could even send the envoy to jail. So while of course we know that the court hasn't arrived at any conclusion yet, but today's remarks fairly significant.
Exactly, it gives the indication of what the thinking of the Chief Justice bench. Basically, the court is of the opinion saying that Daniele Mancini came to the court not as an ambassador but as an individual, giving assurance to the court that all the two Marines will be back after 4 weeks of leave. But now going back on his words, court feels that he doesn't have immunity because he came to the court as a person, not as an ambassador. That is the thinking in court's mind, but we'll have to wait and see what exactly happens on the 2nd of April. Another important thing, as I mentioned you, Attorney General informing the court about the new note they received from the Italian government, which basically says that want a reassurance from the government, saying that the freedom of movement of the Italian ambassador will not be restricted. Basically, the Italian government wants the government to overrule the court's order, because court today also extended its order saying that Italian ambassador should not leave the country till further orders.
That's a very, very significant where there, as you mentioned there, the court had, of course, earlier issued that directive to the Italian envoy saying that he could not leave the country till further orders, and that order we know now stands till the next date of hearing, which is the 2nd of April. What is also significant is that the deadline that had been set for those Italian Marines to return to India by the Supreme Court ends on the 26th of March. That's Friday. So the big question still remains, will the Italian government even remotely consider sending the Marines back? They have, of course, ruled it out thus far. But whether, there is still talk about whether this is really a case of contempt of court on the one hand and diplomatic immunity enjoyed by the envoy on the other. Like you mentioned, this is something that was brought up even by the envoy's counsel today, who in fact brought up the Vienna Convention. So that debate, in a sense, carries on.
Exactly. In fact, the Supreme Court will be the arbiter on this, whether the Italian ambassador who came to the court as an individual will have immunity or not. Mukul Rohatgi, appearing for the ambassador, said that as per the Vienna Convention, he has the immunity. He simply gave the assurance based on the decision of the Italian government and the Prime Minister. So he can't be hauled for contempt. But court said, we know what our powers are because we have lost trust on you, because you went back on your assurance to the court. Whether you have immunity or not, we will examine. But Chief Justice said he doesn't have immunity because he came to the court as an individual, not as an ambassador. But all these things, as you rightly said, will be decided on the 2nd of April when the court takes up the case again.
Right, where they also, the government of India has been repeatedly asked what steps it actually is going to take in this regard, given that Italy reneged on the assurance that it had given to the Supreme Court. Do you get the sense now that the government has, in a sense, left it entirely to the Supreme Court? Because we know that MEA representatives have, in fact, been saying, let's wait till the 22nd of March to see whether those Marines are going to return or not.
As far as the government is concerned, of course, yes, the government wants the Italian government to honor the Supreme Court order as well as the assurance given to the Supreme Court. At the same time, the government also wants the court to solve this issue because the court has permitted both the Marines to leave for Italy to exercise their franchise for 4 weeks. So now, of course, Centre is also caught in a cliff. Basically, it says the Marines should come back. At the same time, they want the issue to be solved by the Supreme Court. Of course, Centre, represented by the Attorney General today, informing the court about the new note where the Italian government says that it wants all sort of restrictions on the Italian ambassador based on the Supreme Court order to be removed.
Right. Also, where there, this is seen really as an unprecedented diplomatic row between India and Italy, with India accusing Italy of betrayal. And of course, we have had some tough words coming from the Indian government over this issue. The Indian government also, in fact, coming in for criticism from the opposition that has accused it of mishandling the issue. But somewhere, as you mentioned, the government now hoping that the Supreme Court is really going to be the final arbiter on this.
One failure on the part of the central government was they should have set up a special court to try these two Marines as per the Supreme Court judgment which was delivered on the 18th of January. Even the last hearing when the Marines were left to go, Supreme Court even criticized the centre, why you are just keeping quiet, you should have set up the special court by now. So that point, of course, centre is at fault for not setting up the special court as directed by the Supreme Court. So otherwise is concerned, yes, now centre leaving the court to the Supreme Court to decide what to do next.
Also, Vedya, of course, you mentioned there that the court did say that on the next date of hearing, it will examine what kind of diplomatic immunity the envoy really enjoys. But as we have been saying, the court has come down heavily on the Italian envoy for reneging on the assurance that he had given before the highest court of the land. If you could once again, Vedya, run us through some of those observations made by the Supreme Court today.
In fact, today, Mukul Rohatgi, representing the Italian government as well as the Italian ambassador, told the court that he has immunity and also he has just given that assurance based on the decision of the Italian government. So, he can't be hauled up for contempt. But court said the Italian ambassador came to the court as an individual, not as an ambassador. So, where is the immunity? He doesn't have any right for immunity, but of course we will examine it on the next hearing. And court also had very strong words for him, saying that you gave an assurance, you went back, and we have completely lost trust on you, and also you don't know the powers of the Supreme Court. Very strong observations by the court. This observation prompted when Mr. Mukul Rohtgi told the court that as per Vienna Convention, he has the immunity and he can't be tried for contempt. So made this argument by the advocate made Chief Justice of India to make all these observations. But of course, it's very clear the court is also taking the line of the MEA, which recently made a statement saying that the immunity is concerned, it's applicable to diplomats, but once the diplomat goes to a court through a petitioner, then there is no immunity. That's what today's Supreme Court is saying, that once Daniele came to Supreme Court as an individual giving an assurance that the both Marines will return, then there is no question of immunity. But of course, all these are observations. We will have to wait for the next hearing for a proper order.
Right, Vedya. So the court really making strong observations there, coming down heavily on the Italian envoy. And even though the final order is still awaited, the next hearing is, of course, on the 2nd of April. But the court saying to the Italian envoy, you've come to us as an individual, not as an ambassador. We will examine what immunity you really enjoy. And till then, perhaps this debate over diplomatic immunity versus contempt of court is likely to continue. Thanks very much, Vedya, for joining us with those details.